Imagine being judged from across the galaxy by an empire that has never lost a war, and they've just decided your tiny world is their next prize. You have no idea they're coming. You have no idea they even exist. That's the exact spot humanity was in. For 10,000 years, the Valoran Dominion had steamrolled every planet in its path, bringing hundreds of species to heel. No one had ever stopped them. No one had even come close. And at the heart of their power stood High Commander Cyrus, a towering gray warrior in ceremonial armor, the greatest military genius of his generation who had personally conquered 37 worlds. He scanned the faces of the council with his 4 eyes, not even trying to hide his contempt. While these old fools sat around talking, he was out there, doing the hard work of expanding the empire. Council members, Cyrus's voice boomed through the massive chamber. I'm here today to present our next target, a small world way out on the spiral arm of the galaxy. The locals call it Earth. He waved a clawed hand, and a hologram of our beautiful blue and green planet materialized above him, swirling with white clouds. As you can see, Earth is primitive, he sneered, showing a row of sharp teeth. The dominant species, who call themselves humans, just figured out how to get to their own moon. Their fastest ships would take years to reach the next star. Technologically, they're infants. He paused, letting the council enjoy the thought. And here's the best part. These humans are a complete mess. They're split into hundreds of little nations that are constantly at each other's throats over resources, beliefs, and tiny patches of dirt. They've even built weapons that can wipe out their own cities and have almost used them on each other multiple times. A wave of laughter echoed through the council. A species that fought itself? The idea was hilarious to the unified Valorans. Their weapons are toys, Cyrus continued. They're still using chemical rockets and things that go boom. Their best ships are made of flimsy metal, no energy shields, no faster-than-light travel, no plasma cannons. Taking their planet will be like stealing candy from a baby. He let the silence hang in the air, his confidence infectious. I'm asking for a fleet of 500 ships. In 1 month, the planet will be ours. We'll take their resources, their labor, and their little corner of space. The council members began to nod in agreement. It seemed like another day at the office, another easy win. But then, a voice cut through the silence from the shadows. I must object. Every head turned. Out of the darkness stepped a figure that made even the mighty Cyrus a little nervous. It was Elder Chaos, the ancient archivist. No one knew how old he was. Some whispered he was there when the Dominion was born. His body was frail and bent, but his eyes were laser-sharp, holding the wisdom of ages. Chaos hobbled toward the center of the room, his staff tapping on the crystal floor. The council members shifted in their seats. The elder almost never came to these meetings, and when he did, it was always bad news. Elder Chaos, the council leader said, you're speaking against this conquest? I am, Chaos replied, his voice raspy but firm. I am here to warn you. Do not attack Earth. Do not mess with the humans. Cyrus actually laughed out loud. With all due respect, Elder, have you seen the intel? These things can barely fly. What possible threat could they be to 500 of our warships? Chaos slowly turned his ancient gaze on the High Commander. There was something in that look that made Cyrus's laughter catch in his throat. I have spent my entire life studying the history of this galaxy, Chaos said slowly. I've read the stories of 10,000 civilizations. I've looked at the ruins of empires that died out long before we ever existed. And in all of my research, one warning keeps showing up over and over again. He raised his staff and slammed it on the floor. The sound was like a giant bell. Do not wake the humans. A dead silence fell over the room. Cyrus felt a chill, though he'd die before admitting it. What are you talking about? The Council Prime asked. Kaios walked to the hologram and waved his hand. The image of Earth vanished, replaced by ancient star charts and alien texts. These are records I've gathered over centuries, he said. They're from species that are long gone, civilizations that vanished thousands of years ago, and many of them mention Earth. He pointed to a strange script. This is from the Kathrani. They basically ran this galaxy before we did. Their empire lasted for 50,000 years, and then poof, they just disappeared. What happened to them? Someone asked. Nobody knows for sure, Chaos answered, but their very last records mention a blue world and a species of impossible fury. The Kathrani wrote that they made a terrible mistake, that they woke something up that should have been left sleeping. Chaos flipped through more records. The Varath Collective, the Cathari Empire, the Children of the Burning Star, all of them at different times ran into Earth, all of them left warnings, and all of them are now extinct. Cyrus stepped forward, his patience gone. These are just legends, Elder. Ghost stories from dead empires. You don't seriously expect us to call off an invasion because of fairy tales. Chaos turned to face him. Let me tell you what I've learned about humans, High Commander. They grew up on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. Their world has ice ages that freeze continents. It has predators with claws made to rip them apart. It has plagues that can kill millions. The very ground beneath their feet shakes, and mountains literally explode. He let that sink in. And yet, humans survived, not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the most ridiculously stubborn creatures in the universe. They just refused to die. When it got cold, they wore the skins of other animals and made fire. When things hunted them, they learned to hunt back. When they got sick, they figured out medicine. When the world fell apart, they just built it again, and again, and again. You see them fighting each other and you think it's a weakness, Chaos said, stepping right up to Cyrus. You think because they're divided they'll be easy to break, but I see something else entirely. I see a species that has been practicing war since the day they were born. Every single human alive is the descendant of survivors who made it through endless conflict. War isn't scary to them. It's what they do. They understand it better than anyone in this galaxy. Cyrus didn't back down. And yet they've never faced an enemy like us. Their little toys can't even scratch our shields. Their ships are pathetic, whatever they've dealt with on their world. They have never faced the Valoran Dominion. That, Chaos said softly, is exactly what worries me. You're about to show humans that there are bigger monsters out there than just each other. You're about to give them one single enemy to unite against. You're about to bring them all together. He turned back to the council. I've studied human psychology. They're a walking contradiction. They can be incredibly kind and unbelievably cruel. They make beautiful art and horrifying weapons. They talk about peace while constantly getting ready for war. But there is one thing, one single trait that defines them. Chaos's voice dropped to a grave whisper. When humans face extinction, they don't surrender, they don't bargain. They don't accept defeat. Something deep inside them simply refuses to lose. And when they finally decide to fight, I mean truly fight, they do things no other species would even dream of. The Council Prime leaned in. Like what? They sacrifice, Chaos said. Other species fight to live. Humans will fight to make sure their enemies die. They will burn down their own cities just to take yours with them. They will poison their own planet to deny it to you. They will send their children to fight knowing they won't come back, just for the chance that their grandchildren might get to live free. He pointed a trembling finger at the beautiful swirling blue hologram of Earth. Imagine being told that your species is insane, that the weapons you built to protect yourselves, weapons capable of wiping out entire cities, are proof that you're nothing but savages. Now imagine the ones telling you this have a fleet pointed at your planet, ready to either enslave you or wipe you out. What would you do? The council thought they had us figured out. It tells me they're unhinged, their leader scoffed, and being crazy isn't a substitute for real power. Elder, you've spent too much time with your nose in old books. The facts are simple. We have 500 warships with plasma cannons and energy shields. They're still using chemical rockets and dumb missiles. This isn't a war, he declared. It's pest control. A few council members nodded along. The old elder, Chios, had given some interesting warnings, but they couldn't ignore the obvious truth. Earth was primitive. Their dominion was advanced. The outcome was a foregone conclusion. The Council Prime called for a vote. All in favor of authorizing the conquest of Earth? Hands shot up all over the chamber. It was a landslide. The conquest is approved, the Council Prime announced. High Commander Cyrath, you will take the fleet to Earth. Bring this world into the Dominion. Cyrath lowered his head, a smug smile creeping across his face. Chaos just stood there for a long moment, then turned and started walking toward the exit. The slow, steady click of his staff echoed in the silence. Elder Chaos, the Council Prime called out. Do you have anything else to add? Chaos paused at the door but didn't bother turning around. I'll say just one thing, he replied, his voice filling the massive hall. In all my centuries, I've seen one story play out over and over. Mighty empires become arrogant. They mistake their strength for invincibility. Then they stumble upon something they don't understand, something that doesn't play by their rules, and they crumble. He started walking again. You know, the humans have a saying, let sleeping dogs lie. It means some things are better left alone. You're about to poke something that has been asleep for a very, very long time. When it wakes up, he said over his shoulder, don't say I didn't warn you. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, and Elder Chaos vanished. Cyrath watched him leave, then turned back to the council, his confidence unshaken. The Elder means well, but he's gotten soft in his old age. I'll leave for Earth within the week. You'll have your new colony in a month. The council burst into applause. It was going to be a glorious victory. They were certain of it. Later that night, in his private quarters, Cyrath went over the intel on Earth one last time. He looked at the humans' clunky spacecraft, their basic weapons, their hopelessly divided nations. Everything just confirmed what he already knew. This would be the easiest win of his career. But as he drifted off to sleep, Chaos's words came back to him. That strange idea of a species willing to sacrifice everything. He brushed the thought aside. It was nonsense. No species, no matter how stubborn, could stand up to the Dominion. The humans would learn their place, just like all the others. He closed his eyes and dreamt of an easy conquest. Billions of miles away, on a small blue planet, 3 billion humans were just living their lives. They were heading to work, raising their kids, arguing about politics and sports. They were laughing and crying, loving and hating. They had absolutely no clue that a fleet of 500 warships was getting ready to either enslave or annihilate them. But hidden away in secret facilities around the globe, in deep underground bunkers and classified labs, some people suspected we weren't alone. They had been preparing, quietly and carefully, for a day they prayed would never arrive. When the sky filled with alien ships, humanity wouldn't be caught completely off guard. And when they found out what the invaders wanted, that surrender meant slavery or extinction, something ancient and incredibly dangerous would awaken in the hearts of 3 billion people. The Valorans were coming to Earth. They had no idea what they were about to set loose. The Valorant Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel just past Earth's moon. 500 warships, each one the size of a small city, settled into a perfect, menacing formation. Their dark metal hulls gleamed, and their weapons ports pulsed with raw power. It was the biggest fleet they had ever sent for a single planet, and High Commander Sarath stood on the bridge of his flagship, gazing down at the blue marble below. "Beautiful," he whispered, "and it will all be ours soon." His second-in-command, a younger officer named Verath, came over with a data tablet. "High Commander, our scans are done. The planet has roughly 8 billion inhabitants. Their biggest cities are spread across the continents. We've pinpointed all their major military bases and communication hubs." "And their defenses?" Sirath asked. "Primitive, just like we thought. They have some satellites in orbit, but nothing that poses a threat to our ships. Their ground weapons are chemical explosives and nuclear bombs. Powerful for them, maybe, but our shields can take anything they've got." Sirath nodded, completely satisfied. "Start the broadcast. Let them meet their new masters." The Valorant signal hijacked every television, radio, and internet connection on Earth at the exact same time. All across the world, billions of people stopped dead as their screens went dark, then lit up with a terrifying new image. Sirath's stern gray face filled every screen. His 4 eyes stared out with cold indifference. "People of Earth," he announced, his voice translated perfectly into every language. "I am High Commander Sarath of the Valorant Dominion. Your world now belongs to us. Resistance is not only futile, it will result in the complete annihilation of your species." He paused, letting the fear sink in. "Our demands are simple. You will surrender without conditions. You will provide us with raw materials and resources as tribute, and you will hand over 30% of your population for labor and service to the Dominion." In homes, offices, schools, and hospitals, humans stared in a state of shock and disbelief. A lot of people thought it had to be some kind of sick, elaborate prank. But then they looked outside, and they could see the ships, dark, menacing shapes blotting out the stars. This was very real. "You have 72 hours to comply," Sirath continued. "If you refuse, we will begin the systematic destruction of your major cities. If you try to fight back, we will show you no mercy. Your weapons can't hurt us. Your ships are no match for ours. Accept your fate and live, or fight and die. The choice is yours." The broadcast cut off. Sarath leaned back in his command chair, feeling pretty good about himself. "Now we wait. In 3 days, this planet will be on its knees." But on Earth, something he never expected started to happen. In the first few hours, there was chaos, just as he'd predicted. Panic flooded the streets. Riots broke out in a few cities, and world leaders scrambled to figure out how to handle a threat they had never dreamed of. Militaries went on high alert, even though they knew their weapons were basically toys against the alien fleet. But then, slowly at first, something shifted. The fighting stopped. Not just the rioting in the streets, but the bigger conflicts too. Wars that had been raging for years suddenly went quiet. Enemies who had been pointing guns at each other for decades lowered their weapons. Political opponents who had built careers on tearing each other down started working together. An emergency session was called at the United Nations. Every single nation sent someone, and for the first time in the history of mankind, there was no bickering, no posturing, no political games. There was only one question on everyone's mind: how do we survive? The answer came from a place most people didn't even know existed. Deep inside a mountain in the American Southwest sat a facility that officially wasn't there. It was built back in the 1960s, when humanity was most paranoid about alien contact. For decades, it was home to scientists and soldiers whose only job was to prepare for this exact day. And that day had finally come. General Sarah Chen, the base commander, stood in front of a wall of screens showing the alien fleet. She was a small woman with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing, and she had dedicated her entire life to this one moment. "Give me the rundown," she said to her team. A scientist named Dr. James Morrison stepped up. "We've been analyzing their ship since they showed up. Their tech is on another level, way beyond anything we have. Their shields seem to be some kind of energy field that can absorb or deflect any missile or projectile we throw at them." "So we can't hurt them," Chen stated bluntly. "Not directly, no, but—" Morrison paused. "Spit it out, Doctor. We don't have time to be shy." "Well," he said, "there might be ways to hurt them indirectly. If we can lure them off those ships and onto our turf, they become vulnerable. Our scans show their soldiers wear armor, but it's built to stop energy weapons, not the raw kinetic force our bullets deliver." Chen thought about that. "They want 30% of our population for slaves. That means they have to come down here eventually. They can't manage 8 billion people from orbit." "Exactly," Morrison said, pulling up a new screen. "And there's one more thing. Their messages suggest they expect us to roll over and surrender. They've pulled this same move on dozens of other worlds. Their entire playbook is built on the idea that any rational species will give up when faced with a superior force." A small, grim smile appeared on General Chen's face. "It turns out they didn't know the first thing about humans. Over the next 72 hours, something happened for the first time in our entire messy history. Nations shared their most guarded secrets, their most advanced weapons and tech. Bitter enemies became brothers in arms overnight. Every resource, every scientist, every soldier was laser-focused on a single mission. They weren't prepping for surrender. They were gearing up for a fight. And they were also setting a trap. When the ultimatum expired, Sireth waited with total confidence for the message of capitulation. Instead, he got a set of coordinates in the American desert and a simple invitation. "You wanted to meet humanity? Come on down and let's get acquainted." Sireth was amused. The sheer audacity of these creatures was almost impressive. They really thought they could stand up to him. "It's obviously a trap," warned Vareth. "Of course it is," Sireth agreed. "But what kind of pathetic trap could these primitives possibly spring on us? We'll send a ground force, crush whatever little resistance they've managed to scrape together, and make an example of them. After that, the rest of this planet will fall in line." He ordered 50,000 soldiers to the surface, the largest ground deployment he'd ever commanded. The transport ships sliced through Earth's atmosphere, touching down in the barren desert at the coordinates the humans provided. The Valoran soldiers fanned out, their weapons hot. But there was nobody there, just endless sand, rocks, and an empty sky. The commanding officer reported back to Sireth. "High Commander, there's no one here. The entire area is deserted." Sireth's brow furrowed. "Search the perimeter. They have to be hiding somewhere." His soldiers spread out, their advanced sensors sweeping the desert. Still nothing, not a single human life sign for miles. And then, the ground started to tremble. At first, the Valorans wrote it off as a simple earthquake, but the shaking intensified, and a deep, terrifying rumble filled the air. That's when they saw it, rising on every horizon. A wall of pure fire. The humans had buried nuclear warheads all over the desert. Dozens of them planted in a perfect circle right around the landing zone. They had invited the Valorans to this exact spot, knowing it was already a graveyard. The commanding officer didn't even have time to scream before the nuclear inferno vaporized everything. Aboard his flagship, Sireth watched, paralyzed with disbelief, as 50,000 of his best soldiers were turned to dust in a heartbeat. The patch of desert they had landed on was now a glowing crater of radioactive glass. They, they destroyed their own land, Vareth stammered. They poisoned their own world just to take out our soldiers. Sireth stood frozen, all four of his eyes wide with shock. In all his centuries of conquest, no species had ever pulled a move like this. When faced with overwhelming power, civilizations either surrendered or ran. They didn't sacrifice their own planet. They didn't turn their home into a weapon. A new message arrived from Earth. It was just one sentence. That was just to get your attention. Ready to discuss terms now? Sireth's shock morphed into pure rage. These insects had just wiped out 50,000 Valoran warriors. 50,000! An insult like that could not stand. Forget capturing them, he snarled. Forget forced labor. We will burn this world to cinders. Begin orbital bombardment of their largest cities. Show them what happens when you defy the Dominion. Vareth hesitated. High Commander, our orders were to take the planet intact. If we destroy too much, our orders have changed. Sireth cut him off, his voice dripping with cold fury. This species cannot be allowed to exist. They are too dangerous. We will exterminate them and salvage whatever's left. The Valoran fleet shifted into an attack formation. 500 warships positioned themselves over Earth's biggest cities, their weapons glowing with catastrophic energy. Down on the ground, people looked up at the skies growing dark and knew what was coming. There was no defense, no shield that could save them. The aliens were about to rain down fire, and millions would perish. But instead of despair, something else entirely swept through the human race, something tougher than fear, defiance. If this was how they were going to go out, they were going out swinging. If their cities were going to burn, they'd make the enemy pay for every single inch. That nuclear trap had taught them a vital lesson. The aliens could be hurt. They could be killed. Their tech was light years ahead, but they weren't gods. The first plasma beam struck Tokyo. The city vanished in a flash of light. Millions of lives were extinguished in moments. The scale of the destruction was beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Buildings vaporized, streets melted into rivers of slag. A city that had stood for centuries was reduced to ash in minutes. Then came Beijing, then Moscow, New York, London. From orbit, the Valorans watched humanity's greatest achievements get erased from existence. Surely they would surrender now. Surely they would see how pointless it was to resist. But the surrender message never came. Instead, something else rose from the smoke and fire of the ruined cities. Something the Valorans never, ever expected. Ships. Human ships. They were crude, ugly things, nothing like the sleek Valoran warships. They looked like they'd been bolted together from scrap metal in a panic. But they flew, roaring up through the atmosphere on columns of fire, aiming straight for the alien fleet. Impossible, Vareth whispered. They're supposed to be a primitive culture. Where did these ships come from? They came from secret programs every major nation had been running for decades. Black-budget projects hidden from the public, preparing for a threat they prayed would never arrive. Ships built in underground hangars, armed with every weapon humanity had managed to dream up, and crewed by volunteers who knew this was a one-way trip. The battle for Earth had begun. The first wave of human ships hit the Valoran fleet and opened fire. Their weapons were toys compared to plasma cannons, just missiles and kinetic slugs. But there were so many of them, and they just kept coming. Most of the missiles splashed uselessly against the Valoran shields, but every now and then one would find a weak spot, a place where repeated hits had worn the energy field thin. And when human steel hit Valoran metal, it left a mark. The first Valoran ship went up in a ball of fire, torn apart by a volley of missiles that should have been completely harmless. Down below, the humans cheered, even as their cities burned around them. Sireth ordered his fleet to wipe the human ships from the sky. It should have been a simple task. Valoran targeting was flawless, and their weapons were overwhelming. Human ships died by the dozens, vaporized before they could even get in range. But for every ship that was destroyed, 2 more rose from the ashes to take its place. And the pilots never retreated. They never broke formation. When their ammo ran dry, they aimed their ships at the nearest Valoran vessel and slammed the throttle. They turned themselves into guided missiles. The first suicide ram took out a Valoran cruiser. The human pilot flew his crippled ship straight into the enemy's command bridge. The resulting explosion killed thousands of Valorans and sent the massive cruiser tumbling down into Earth's atmosphere. Vareth stared at the tactical display, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. They're dying on purpose. They're killing themselves just to hurt us. I can see that, you fool, Cyrith snapped. Destroy them all. But the humans kept coming. From every continent, from hidden bases all over the globe, ships rose to challenge the invaders. They died in horrific numbers, losing 3 or 4 ships for every single Valoran vessel they managed to damage. But they never ever stopped. A captured human pilot was brought to the bridge of Cyreth's flagship for interrogation. She was young, her face blistered from radiation burn, one arm hanging limp and useless, but her eyes held zero fear. "Why are you fighting?" Cyreth demanded. "You cannot win. Your ships are pathetic. Your weapons are crude. For every 100 of our soldiers we lose, you lose thousands of your people. Why do you insist on this?" The pilot smiled, her teeth stained with blood. "You think we're fighting to win?" she asked, her voice raspy but strong. "We're not fighting to win. We're fighting to make sure the rest of the galaxy remembers the price of coming for Earth. We're fighting so that 1,000 years from now, when some other species finds your records, they'll think twice before messing with humans." She leaned in, her eyes blazing with a terrifying fire. "We're writing a warning in your blood, and we will keep writing it until there isn't a single human left to hold the pen." Cyreth just stared at her, and for the first time in his long, decorated career of conquest, he felt a sensation he had never known before: fear. He had brought dozens of worlds to their knees. He had faced enemies with superior technology and massive armies, but he had never, ever faced anything like this. The humans didn't fight like any other race. They didn't weigh the odds or count their losses. They just refused to quit. The pilot was dragged away, but her words haunted Cyreth's mind. He walked to the main viewport and looked down at Earth. The planet was on fire in a dozen places, great scars of smoke rising from the skeletons of its cities. By any logical measure, the humans were being annihilated. Their losses were catastrophic. Their civilization was being systematically dismantled. And still, they fought on. Cyrith remembered the words of Elder Chaos, his warnings. He remembered the ancient records, the stories of extinct civilizations. The same message repeated across millennia: do not wake the humans. He was finally starting to understand. These creatures weren't fighting a war, they were fighting extinction itself. And somewhere, deep in their evolutionary code, they had learned that you can cheat extinction if you're willing to pay any price, absolutely any price at all. And in that moment, Cyrith made a decision that had never once been made in the entire history of the Valoran Dominion. Imagine being so powerful you could conquer galaxies, only to be stopped by a species that just figured out how to send selfies into space. "This is High Commander Sith," his voice desperate, patching through to the galactic conclave. "I need reinforcements. Send everything you've got." A long, static-filled pause, then the reply, dripping with disbelief. "High Commander, you have 500 ships. You're fighting a primitive world. How could you possibly need help?" Just then, Scythe watched another human ship, little more than a rocket with guns, ram a Valorian cruiser, engulfing them both in a silent, fiery explosion. "Because I was wrong," he whispered. "We all were. This isn't a primitive world. This is something else, and if we don't end this now, I'm not sure we ever can." The battle for Earth was a wildfire, and though humanity was burning, it was fighting back with a fury that had been tragically ignored. And if you think that's intense, stick around, because you won't believe what happens next. Now, the Valoran invaders were learning the price of that mistake, one ship at a time, 6 months, 6 brutal months since their shadows first fell across Earth's ski. Half a year of constant war, of cities turned to glass and ships raining from the heavens. It was death on a scale humanity had never known. The numbers were just staggering. Over 2 billion people gone, lost to orbital strikes, vicious ground assaults, or the slow grinding misery of starvation as civilization crumbled. And yet somehow, humanity was still in the fight. From the bridge of his flagship, High Commander Scythe stared at the holographic image of Earth. The planet looked broken, covered in massive glowing scars that crossed continents like angry wounds. Dozens of great cities were now just radioactive craters. The governments of man had collapsed, their leaders either dead or in hiding. By every single rule in the Valoran military playbook, Earth should have surrendered months ago. Any sane species would have given up. The cost was too high, the odds were impossible. But the humans, it turned out, were not being sane. They were being stubborn. "Report," Sith barked. An officer named Vareth stepped forward, the same bone-deep weariness on his face that haunted every Valoran in the fleet. The 1-month cakewalk had turned into a never-ending nightmare. "Our fleet is down to 412 ships," Vareth stated flatly. "We've lost 88 cruisers since the invasion started. Most were taken out by suicide attacks, or their surprisingly effective missiles launched from the ground. And the reinforcements I begged for? Another 200 ships are on the way, sir. They should be here within the week." Sith gave a short nod, but his face was a mask of grim reality. He'd started this war with 500 ships against a planet that didn't even have a space fleet. Now he needed 700 just to hold the line in orbit. "What about the ground war?" he asked. Vareth paused, clearly dreading the answer. "We control about 30% of the planet's surface, mostly areas we've bombed into submission. But the humans have regrouped everywhere else. They've built new command centers, new supply routes, even new weapons factories, right under our noses." He brought up a tactical map, glowing with enemy positions. "They're building ships faster than we thought possible, and these aren't the junk heaps they threw at us in the beginning. These are better designs, using tech they've scavenged and reverse-engineered from our own wrecked ships. Their weapons are getting stronger, their shields. They're still crude, but they're improving." Sith stared at the display, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. "How? How is this possible? We shattered their cities, their industries, their universities. Where are they getting the materials to do any of this?" "From everywhere," Vareth said. "They've turned every basement and garage into a factory. They're digging for ore with shovels if they have to. They're training new pilots on simulators pieced together from scrap. Their entire surviving population is dedicated to this war." He paused, his voice dropping. "Even the children. We've captured resistance fighters as young as 12. They aren't on the front lines, but they're working in factories, running messages, tending to the wounded. Their whole species has become one giant war machine." Scythe processed that. There were 8 billion humans before the war. 2 billion were dead. That left 6 billion people focused on a single purpose: throwing the Valorans off their planet. It was unheard of. In the entire history of the Dominion, no one had ever resisted like this. Every other species had a breaking point, a threshold of pain where they would finally surrender. The humans didn't seem to have one. "There's something else," Varath said, his tone grave. "Something you have to see." He switched the display to a ruined city in a place once called Canada. Humans had built a new settlement within the wreckage, a labyrinth of underground tunnels and fortified ruins. "We took this city 3 weeks ago," Varath explained. "Our records called it New Toronto. We rounded up the survivors for labor, just like the initial plan dictated." "And," Sith prompted, "and they killed every last soldier we sent in to guard them." Sith's 4 eyes narrowed. "How? We disarmed them. We took everything." "They made new weapons." Varath's voice was hollow, filled with a sense of disbelief. "Kitchen knives, sharpened rebar, clubs made from shattered concrete. They even mixed cleaning supplies into chemical weapons that ate right through our armor." He played footage from a security camera. It was pure chaos. A hallway packed with Valorant soldiers fighting hand-to-hand with a mob of humans. The people were armed with practically nothing. Many were rail-thin and injured, but they just kept coming, swarming over their own fallen to get to the invaders. They coordinated the entire uprising with hand signals and whispers, Varath continued. "We had no idea it was coming. 1 second it was quiet, the next 20,000 humans were attacking us all at once, all across the city." The video showed a middle-aged woman, gaunt from hunger, jamming a shard of glass into the neck joint of a Valorant soldier's armor. As the soldier crumpled, a dozen other humans swarmed him, tearing at his suit with their bare hands. "Our men reported that the humans were smiling," Varath said, his voice barely a whisper. "Even while they were dying, they were smiling. One of our lieutenants got a final message out. He said, 'They just keep coming. We've killed thousands. They just keep coming. They're smiling.'" "Why are they smiling?" Sith watched the horrific scene in silence. The fight for New Toronto had lasted 18 hours. By the time it was over, every single Valorant soldier in that city was dead. The humans took devastating losses, but they had won. With knives and glass. "Pull all our ground troops back from every occupied city," Sith commanded, his voice firm. "We can't hold territory this way. The humans are too chaotic." Varath nodded. "I reached the same conclusion. We have to win this war from orbit, bomb them until they have nothing left to fight with, without ever stepping foot on that planet again." It was the only logical move left, but it was a total abandonment of their original mission. This wasn't a conquest anymore. It had become a war of extermination. And on Earth, humanity knew it too. They saw the Valorant troops pulling out and watched the enemy fleet regroup for a relentless orbital assault. They knew exactly what was coming, and they got ready. Deep in a bunker buried beneath the Rocky Mountains, the last leaders of Earth's shattered nations met for a final council of war. General Sarah Chen, the reluctant commander of humanity's unified forces, stood before a wall of screens. "The enemy is done trying to occupy us," she stated, her voice echoing in the tense silence. "They're going to try and wipe us out from space, bombing every settlement one by one until there's nothing left." The faces staring back at her were grim but not broken. Presidents, generals, scientists, every one of them had lost someone. Every one of them was running on fumes, but not a single one was ready to give up. "So what are our options?" asked the former president of Russia, a man whose eyes held the ghosts of his entire nation. Chen brought up a new image. "We've been building something," she said. "A project that combines everything we've salvaged from their technology with the best ideas our own people could come up with." The display showed a fleet of ships, but they looked nothing like the crude fighters from the early days of the war. These were sharp, deadly, and built for a single purpose. They weren't as graceful as the Valorant ships, but they pulsed with raw power. "We call it the Phoenix Fleet," Chen announced. 57 ships built in secret facilities all over the planet. Every one of them is armed with weapons that can punch right through Valoran shields, thanks to the tech we reverse-engineered from their wrecks. 57 ships against more than 400, the Chinese representative pointed out grimly. "And they have reinforcements on the way." "I know the odds," Chen shot back, "but these ships are better than anything we've ever launched, and more importantly, our pilots are better than anyone the Valorans have ever seen." She looked each leader in the eye. "Our people have been fighting this war for 6 months. They've learned how to kill aliens with scrap metal. They've flown ships that were falling apart into the heart of the enemy's fleet. They have done the impossible over and over again, simply because they refuse to lose." Chen's voice hardened into steel. "The Valorans think they know war? They don't. They've only ever fought enemies who knew when to quit. They've never faced an enemy that has forgotten how. We are going to teach them." She laid out the plan. It was a long shot. It was practically a suicide mission, but it was the only chance they had left. 3 days later, the Phoenix Fleet was a go. From hidden bases scattered across the globe, 57 human ships punched through the atmosphere in a perfectly timed assault. The Valorans saw them coming instantly and moved to cut them off. The commander scoffed. "More suicide runs, sir," watching the tactical display. "Will they ever learn?" He simply ordered, "Wipe them out." But these ships were different. When the Valoran cannons roared to life, the human ships dodged with a skill that was completely unexpected. When plasma blasts hammered their shields, the barriers flared but held on far longer than they ever should have. And when the human ships fired back, their weapons tore through the alien defenses with terrifying precision. The first Valoran cruiser died in a matter of minutes, ripped open by missiles that seemed to know every single weak point. A second followed, then a third. The Valoran commander watched, his arrogance turning to shock as his superior numbers started to mean less and less. The humans weren't just putting up a fight, they were actually winning one-on-one dogfights. Their ships moved like a single organism, covering each other's backs, focusing their fire on already wounded enemies, and pulling back from losing fights only to reappear and strike from a whole new direction. "How?" the commander demanded, his voice cracking. "How is this possible?" The answer was simple, though the aliens wouldn't figure it out for a long time. Human pilots had spent months living in simulators, studying every move the Valorans made, learning their habits and pinpointing their flaws until they could fly the missions in their sleep. They had picked apart every single battle of the war, every win and every loss, and built their new strategy from the lessons learned. But they had something else, something the Valorans could never understand: pure, unfiltered desperation. Every single pilot knew that if they lost this battle, their species was finished. There was no surrender, no running away, and no do-overs. They fought with the chilling fury of people with absolutely nothing left to lose, but everything in the world to protect. The battle raged for hours. Human ships went down in flames, but for everyone that did, a Valoran ship went down with it. The kill ratio, which had been brutally one-sided, started to even out. When the Phoenix Fleet finally broke off the attack, they left the wreckage of 17 of their ships behind. But floating beside them was the shattered debris of 31 Valoran warships. It was the first real, undeniable human victory of the war. On Earth, people huddled in underground bunkers in ruined cities heard the news. For the first time in 6 long months, a flicker of hope ignited, real hope. The enemy wasn't invincible. They could bleed. The alien High Commander Sith took the report with a cold rage. 31 ships, lost to a bunch of primitives who were still launching chemical rockets when the invasion started. He turned to his second-in-command. "The reinforcements. What's their ETA? 2 more days, Vareth answered. Contact the Conclave, Sith ordered. Tell them we need more ships. Tell them... He struggled to get the words out. Tell them Earth is a much bigger threat than we ever imagined. Far across the galaxy on Theron Prime, the Galactic Conclave received Sith's message with stunned alarm. A backwater world had just destroyed 88 of the Dominion's finest warships. It sounded like a joke, but the data was right there, impossible to ignore. Elder Chaos stood before the council once more, his ancient face showing not a hint of triumph, only a deep weariness. You were warned, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I told you what these humans were capable of. I told you they would never surrender. I told you they would burn their own world to the ground before they would bow to us. The Council Prime leaned forward, his voice tense. What do you propose we do now, Elder? Chaos was silent for a long, heavy moment. I suggest, he said slowly, that you finally consider the one possibility no one in this room wants to admit. We might not be able to win this war, that every ship we throw at them will only postpone the inevitable. That's insane, one of the council members shouted. We have thousands of ships. Earth has, what, a few hundred? For now, Chaos agreed calmly. But think about what you've just seen. 6 months ago, humans didn't even have a space fleet. Now, they have ships that can go toe-to-toe with ours. They jumped from primitive rockets to energy shields in half a year. What do you think they'll be capable of in another 6 months, or a year, or 10? He motioned toward the battle reports. These creatures learn faster than any species we have ever met. They adapt, they improvise. Every single weapon we throw at them, they find a way to counter. Every tactic we use, they develop a new way to beat it. And they never, ever give up. The council chamber fell silent. There is an old Valoran proverb, Chaos continued, never wake a sleeping predator. We did something much worse. We didn't just wake the humans. We showed them that there are monsters in the dark between the stars. We gave them a reason to build technology that would have taken them centuries to discover on their own. He looked each council member in the eye. In our attempt to conquer Earth, we may have accidentally created the very thing we've always feared, a species that will not stop until either they are extinct or we are. Back on Earth, General Chen stood in the rubble of what was once a great city, looking up at the night sky. Somewhere up there, the Valoran fleet was tending to its wounds, getting ready for the next round. And somewhere beyond them, more alien ships were on their way. The war was a long way from over, but the air had changed. For 6 months, humanity had been fighting just to see the next sunrise. Now, for the very first time, they were fighting to win. An officer ran up to her. General, a message from Intel. We've been listening in on their communications. The enemy is screaming for more reinforcements, a lot more. Chen allowed herself the ghost of a smile. Good, she said. That means we're finally hurting them. There's more, ma'am, the officer added, his voice filled with excitement. Our scientists just had a major breakthrough. All that captured alien tech gave them some ideas. They think they can crack faster than light travel within a few months. Chen's small smile vanished, replaced by something much harder, much colder. Then this war won't be contained to our solar system for very long, she said softly. Sooner or later, we're taking it to them. She gazed back up at the stars, those distant lights that had seemed so out of reach just 1 year ago. They came here to wipe us out, to chain us, to break us. They had no clue what they were unleashing, and now they were about to get a lesson on what happens when you give humanity a reason to reach for the stars. The next chapter of the war was about to be written, and this time, humanity was holding the pen. A full year had passed since the first Valoran ships blotted out the sun, 12 months of fire, blood, and loss on a scale that would have shattered any other species. The human population had been cut in half, from 8 billion down to less than 4 billion. An entire half of humanity gone in a single, brutal year. And yet, humanity had never been stronger. The Phoenix fleet had ballooned from a mere 57 ships to over 300. Factories, rebuilt on the ashes of bombed-out cities, churned out weapons and spacecraft 24/7. Scientists who used to fight over grant money were now working side by side in secret labs, tearing up the known laws of physics to invent new ways to survive. And they had finally done it. They had achieved the impossible, faster than light travel. The first human ship to break that barrier was named the Defiance. It wasn't a pretty ship. It was a blocky, ugly thing built for a fight, not for a photo op. But when it fired up its prototype FTL drive and simply blinked out of Earth's orbit, only to reappear moments later on the other side of the moon, a single, global cheer erupted from every bunker and outpost on the planet. Humanity was no longer caged. The galaxy was open for business. But the war at home raged on. The Valorans had doubled down, bringing in enough reinforcements to swell their fleet to over 600 ships. They weren't making the same mistakes twice, changing their tactics to counter the humans' clever strategies. The battles in orbit turned into vicious, grinding slugfests where both sides were taking horrific losses. High Commander Scythe was a changed man. The arrogant conqueror who had brushed off Elder Chaos's warnings was gone. In his place was a weary, haunted officer who had seen thousands of his best soldiers die fighting an enemy that refused to break. "Report," he said, the words sounding hollow from constant repetition. Vareth, looking just as drained, brought up the tactical map. The human fleet now stands at approximately 312 warships. We have 574 after last week's battle. Their tech is still catching up at an alarming rate. Their weapons are almost on par with ours now. Their shields can take multiple direct hits from our main cannons, and their tactics. Vareth just shook his head. They're unpredictable. Every single fight, they pull a new trick out of their sleeve. Scythe stared at the numbers on the screen. The Dominion still had the advantage, but that advantage was shrinking every day. A year ago, the thought of humans matching Valoran technology would have been laughable. Now, it felt like it was just a matter of time. "Any new word from the Conclave?" he asked. "Yes, they're getting nervous. News of our losses is starting to leak across the Dominion. Other conquered species are beginning to pay attention." This was Sith's greatest fear. The Valoran Dominion was held together by an illusion of unstoppable power. 100 worlds stayed in line because they believed fighting back was useless. If that belief started to crumble. "What are they seeing?" Sith asked quietly. Varath brought up a news screen showing video feeds that were being secretly passed around on the Dominion's networks. For months, grainy footage had been rocketing through the hidden networks of the galaxy. It showed the impossible, primitive human ships ramming into sleek Valoran warships. Gritty human soldiers, outmatched and outgunned, fighting with a ferocity that defied all logic. Ver explained that at first, the other conquered species watched it like a sport. "Look at the primitives," they'd chuckle, "fighting a war they can't possibly win." But as the months dragged on, the laughter died. Worlds that had been under the Dominion's thumb for centuries started watching these humans resist, and they began to whisper dangerous questions. Questions like, if these humans with no experience and clunky tech can hold their own, what could we do? Or even more dangerous, if we all rose up at once, could the Dominion really stop us all? A cold dread crept down Sir's spine. This was the nightmare Elder Chaos had warned them about. The humans weren't just fighting a war for their planet, they were accidentally igniting a revolution across the stars. In secret gatherings on a dozen different worlds, the same scenes played out. The Kathrani, a warrior race crushed 5,000 years ago, watched footage of human pilots turning their damaged ships into missiles, sacrificing everything to take an enemy down with them. They remembered their own failed resistance and began to wonder, what if? The Vorath, a species of brilliant mathematicians, started running the numbers on a galaxy-wide rebellion. For centuries, the equation had always equaled suicide. But now, with the Dominion's main fleet stuck in a stalemate over Earth, the variables were starting to change. The Centauri, a people of artists and musicians who had been forced to create nothing but propaganda, began composing new songs in secret. They wrote anthems of defiance, ballads of Earth, and hymns for a future they barely dared to imagine. And the children of the burning star, an ancient race nearly wiped out by the Dominion, watched the humans fight and felt a forgotten ember in their chests flicker back to life. Hope. It all came to a head at a tiny space station hidden in the swirling clouds of a gas giant. Here, representatives from 12 conquered species met in absolute secrecy. Getting caught meant immediate execution for treason, but some risks were finally worth taking. "We've all seen the videos," said the Cathan representative, a tall insectoid with shimmering wings. "These humans have held out for a full year. They've taken down hundreds of Valoran ships. They've somehow developed technology that's starting to rival our masters, and they absolutely refuse to surrender." A small, furry Vorath delegate with enormous, thoughtful eyes added something even more stunning. "It's more than that. Our sources have confirmed they've achieved faster-than-light travel. Human ships have been spotted outside their own solar system for the very first time. They're not just defending anymore. They're expanding." The Centauri artist, whose voice was like a melody, asked the question that hung in the air. "So what are we going to do about it?" The room went dead silent. They all knew the answer, but saying it and doing it were two very different things. "If we rise up and fail, the Dominion will exterminate us," the Vorath said, his voice trembling. "They've done it before for less." The Kithrani warrior slammed a fist on the table. "But if we do nothing, we are slaves forever. We have watched humans die for a freedom that should belong to all of us. How much longer can we just sit and watch?" The debate raged for hours, a tug of war between centuries of fear and a new spark of hope. Finally, they reached a decision. They would contact the humans. The message, simple and direct, was smuggled through a secret web of spies and pirates, bouncing from one hidden relay to the next to avoid being traced. It read, "To the people of Earth, we are the conquered worlds of the Valoran Dominion. We have watched your fight with admiration. We offer our knowledge, our resources, and our alliance. Together, we can end this tyranny." On Earth, in a makeshift communications center built from the rubble of New York City, a technician's eyes went wide. "General Chen," he yelled, "you have got to see this." Chen read the message once, twice, 3 times. Allies, real allies from deep inside the enemy's empire. This was a game changer. She typed out a response, every word weighed down by the gravity of history. "To the conquered peoples of the Valoran Dominion, we accept your offer with gratitude and solidarity. We didn't start this war, but we will finish it. We fight not just for Earth, but for everyone who suffers under your masters. Send us what you know. We will put it to good use, and when the time is right, we will stand with you. The Dominion's days are numbered. That is our promise. Humanity is with you." And so, the Great Alliance was born in the shadows. A secret river of information began to flow between Earth and the oppressed worlds. They sent star maps, fleet movements, security codes, every weakness the Dominion had. In return, humanity sent them something far more powerful: defiance. They sent training guides on how to organize resistance cells, how to sabotage factories, and how to fight a technologically superior enemy. But woven into every transmission was one simple, powerful message that resonated with every species. You are only beaten when you choose to be. As long as you fight back, you can never truly be conquered. The Dominion rules with fear. Show them you are not afraid, and their empire will turn to dust. Soon, small acts of sabotage began to pop up everywhere. Factory production slowed to a crawl. Supply shipments for the war fleet got lost. Nothing big enough to provoke a massacre, but it was like 1,000 tiny cuts. And then the humans came. The first ship to arrive was the Defiance. It blinked into existence in the skies of a Kathrani colony, right in the middle of a Valoran patrol. The enemy ships opened fire, but the Defiance was unbelievably fast, dancing between their attacks. It fired back with pinpoint accuracy, destroying 2 patrol ships in seconds before vanishing back into hyperspace. The attack was over in minutes, but its message echoed for an eternity. The humans were real. They weren't just a story on a screen anymore. They were here, taking the fight to the enemy's doorstep. On the Kathrani colony below, the streets filled with cheering crowds. When the Valoran garrison moved to break them up, they were met not with fear, but with open defiance. The dam of fear that had held for centuries was finally breaking. All across the Dominion, the story was the same. A human ship would appear, strike a blow for freedom, and disappear, leaving a trail of hope in its wake. Each strike was small, but the symbolism was massive. The galaxy had been watching Earth. Now, Earth was watching back. High Commander Sir read the reports with a growing sense of panic. This wasn't a conquest anymore. It was a galactic firestorm. "We have to end this now," he roared in an emergency broadcast to the Council. "We must pull all our forces, crush Earth completely before this rebellion consumes us." "And leave our other territories undefended?" the Council Prime shot back. "We already have uprisings on 3 worlds. If we move the fleet, we could lose everything." It was a trap with no escape. Focus on the humans and lose the Empire. Protect the Empire and let the humans become a galactic power. Every path led to ruin. From the shadows, Elder Chaos spoke for the last time. "There is one path you haven't considered." The entire council turned. "Peace," Chaos said. "End the war. Withdraw from Earth. Treat them as equals." The outrage was instantaneous. "Peace with those primitives?" the Council Prime scoffed. "We would look weak. Every world we rule would rebel." "They are already rebelling," Chaos calmly replied. "And they will keep doing so as long as the humans give them hope. But if we make peace, that hope dies. The rebellions will have no one to look up to." He let the words hang in the air. "We made a mistake. We woke a sleeping giant. We can either spend the next 100 years fighting a war that will tear our dominion apart, or we can swallow our pride and choose survival." The council argued for days, and in the end, blinded by arrogance, they rejected peace. That single decision sealed their fate. The Dominion's message was simple. Surrender was not an option. Showing weakness was not an option. The war would rage on until Earth was nothing but a memory. Chaos could only nod, his heart heavy as he left the chamber. He'd tried his best, but the decision was made. Far away on Earth, General Chen got the news through her spy network. "They won't stop," she told her commanders, her voice grim. "They're just going to keep coming until one of us is dust." Admiral Rodriguez slammed his fist on the table. "Then we'll make damn sure it's them," he declared, his eyes blazing. "Our new ships are almost ready. Give us 1 more month, and we'll have the firepower to take this fight to their front door." Chen gave a slow, deliberate nod. For an entire year, humanity had been on the defensive, just trying to keep their home from being overrun. But they all knew you can't win a war by blocking punches forever. Sooner or later, you have to start swinging back. That time was now. She gazed out at the star-dusted blackness, a galaxy that felt like a distant dream just 2 years ago. So much had been sacrificed, so many lives lost. But in the fire, humanity had forged something new. A shared purpose, a unity they'd never known, and the powerful knowledge that they were not fighting alone. "Get our allies on the line," she commanded. "Tell them it's time. We're going to end this war. And when it's over, the galaxy will never forget what happens when you threaten Earth." The final act was about to begin. It had been 2 long years since the first Valoran warships had blotted out the sun over Earth. 2 years of a brutal war that had turned a species that could barely reach its own moon into a power that could challenge the galaxy's greatest empire. The price had been staggering. 4 billion human lives had been extinguished. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years were now just glowing, radioactive craters. The planet itself was wounded, its climate thrown into chaos by endless bombardments. But humanity had endured, and they had become strong. The human fleet now boasted over 500 ships, built in secret bases across the globe and on the moon. Each ship was a masterpiece born from desperation and brilliance, a mix of stolen Valoran tech and raw human ingenuity. They weren't pretty, but they were lethal. And this time, they weren't fighting alone. Warships from 12 species, once crushed under the Dominion's heel, had joined them, creating the first real alliance against the Valoran Empire. The Kathrani brought their hard-won knowledge of Valoran battle plans. The Vorath offered their genius for strategy. The Cathari provided communications tech that was impossible to crack. And the Children of the Burning Star, a people who had lost everything, brought a righteous fury that burned as hot as humanity's. They called themselves the Liberation Fleet. General Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, the Unconquered, staring at a holographic map of the entire galaxy. 2 years ago, a view like this was pure science fiction. Today, it was her battlefield. "Status report," she said, her voice calm and steady. Admiral Rodriguez stepped up. "All ships are in position, 512 human vessels, 347 allied ships. We're looking at a total of 859 ships." Chen nodded. It was the biggest fleet ever assembled to fight the Dominion, but they were still outgunned. "Intel confirms the Valorans have pulled back over 1,000 ships to their home world, Theron Prime. They've arranged them in a defensive sphere, expecting us to charge straight in and try to break their lines. And that," she said with a faint smile, "is exactly what we are not going to do." Chen turned to the Allied commanders on her bridge. "Today, we remind the galaxy what happens when free people fight as one. Today, the Dominion ends." The battle plan was months in the making, not a simple charge, but a complex, multi-pronged attack hitting every weakness they had discovered. The entire fleet leaped into hyperspace. When they burst back into normal space at Theron Prime, the Valoran Armada was waiting. Over 1,000 warships in a perfect, intimidating formation, weapons hot and shields glowing. At the very center was the massive flagship of High Commander Syra. He watched the approaching fleet, his face a mask of grim resolve. He'd been fighting humans for 2 years. He'd lost comrades, ships, and most of his original fleet, but he would not lose here. The entire future of the Dominion was on the line. "All ships, prepare to engage," he ordered. "This is where we make our final stand." The Liberation Fleet didn't charge. Instead, it broke apart, spreading into smaller, seemingly random groups. The Valorans, smelling blood, surged forward to pick off what they thought were easy targets. It was a perfectly laid trap. The scattered groups weren't disorganized, they were bait, and as the Dominion ships broke their tight formation to give chase, the real attack began. A second wave of ships dropped out of hyperspace, appearing directly behind the Valoran lines. These were smaller, faster vessels, packed with heavy weapons and crewed by volunteers on a suicide mission. Their targets weren't the warships, but the supply depots and communication hubs that kept the fleet connected. Within minutes, the Valoran fleet was blind and deaf. Ships that were once part of a perfect machine were suddenly fighting alone, cut off from their commanders and their comrades. "Reform the lines," Syra roared, but his orders vanished into the static of jammed communications. That's when the Liberation fleet hit them with everything they had. Human ships flew wing to wing with their new allies, tearing into the confused Valoran fleet. The Kathrani ships disabled engines with surgical strikes. The Vorith coordinated attacks with terrifying mathematical precision. And the humans? They fought like they had nothing left to lose. The Battle of Theron. Prime raged for 18 hours, the most savage battle in the history of the galaxy. The space around the planet became a graveyard of twisted metal and fire. But slowly, inch by bloody inch, the Liberation fleet gained the upper hand. Valoran ships were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. Their once unbreakable formation was now just dozens of small, isolated pockets fighting for their lives. With every Valoran ship that exploded, the hope of the others died with it. From his bridge, Syra watched his fleet being ripped to shreds. The tactical display was a sea of red alerts. His losses were catastrophic. The Liberation fleet was taking a beating too, but they just kept coming. "High Commander," his second-in-command said, his voice hollow. "It's over. We have to surrender." Syra was silent. Surrender? In 10,000 years, a Valoran fleet had never surrendered. The word itself was a disgrace. But as he watched another squadron of his ships get vaporized by human torpedoes, he knew the only alternative was complete annihilation. "Send the signal," he whispered. "All ships, cease fire. We surrender." The guns went silent. Across the battlefield, ships that had been locked in a death dance a moment before drifted apart, their crews staring in stunned disbelief. Then, slowly, the Liberation fleet began to move, forming a ring around the defeated Dominion. When General Chen heard the news, she didn't cheer. Too many had died for that. But she felt a cold, hard satisfaction. They had done it. They had actually won. Her shuttle flew toward Syra's flagship, escorted by human marines. The massive Valoran ship was scarred and battered, but its heart was still beating. Chen walked through its halls, her soldiers at her side, past Valoran crew who looked at her with a mix of terror and awe. She found Syra in his command center, standing among the ruins of his empire. He looked like a man who had aged 100 years in a day. "High Commander Syra," Chen said, her voice even. "Your fleet is broken. Your empire is done. Do you have anything to say?" Syra turned to face her. This tiny human woman, with her scarred face and prosthetic arm, had accomplished the impossible. She had brought the mighty Dominion to its knees. "Your elder warned you," Chen said before he could find his voice. "You should have listened." Syra nodded slowly. "Yes, we should have. We were arrogant. We believed our power made us gods. We never understood that real strength comes from something else." He looked at her, and for the first time there was respect in his eyes. "What happens now?" Chen's expression was like stone. "The Dominion is dissolved. The worlds you conquered are free. Your fleet will be taken apart piece by piece. and your planets will be governed by councils made of the very people you enslaved." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "But you won't be there to see it. You gave the order that killed 4 billion of my people. You turned our cities to ash. You murdered our children. For you, there will be no trial, no exile, no mercy." Syra accepted his fate with a slow nod. He'd expected no less. "Before you carry out the sentence," he said, "may I send one last message to my people and to all the worlds that watched us fall?" Chen thought for a moment, then gave a single nod. Syra activated the galaxy-wide broadcast. "This is High Commander Syra. I speak to my own people, to the species we once ruled, and to every world that witnessed this war. We were wrong." He let out a long, shaky breath, the weight of his words pressing down on him. 2 years ago, my people targeted a tiny, isolated blue world out on a galactic rim. We thought it would be a simple victory. The beings there seemed so primitive. Their tech was a joke. They were always at each other's throats. We dismissed them as a footnote. His voice dropped to a gravelly whisper. We couldn't have been more wrong. We thought we were swatting a fly. But we had just declared war on the most relentless, adaptable predator this universe has ever produced. We woke a sleeping giant, and now we're facing extinction for our mistake. He looked straight into the recording lens, his eyes pleading. "To anyone and everyone who receives this transmission, I am begging you to listen. It's the very same warning our own elders gave us, a warning we arrogantly laughed at. Do not go to Earth. Do not provoke humanity. Don't do a single thing that makes them see you as a threat. By all means, approach them in peace. They are surprisingly kind. They are generous partners and brilliant collaborators. They can become the greatest friends you've ever had. But," he paused, shaking his head with a look of pure dread, "if you threaten their home, if you try to take what is theirs, if you force them to fight, then all I can say is, may whatever you pray to have mercy on your soul."